a pot of money for us and how we basically run the school. We do have grants in addition to that, but that's not a part of this report. It's not required to be a part of this report for TEA. So what you see there are the two funds that we're required to make sure we have adopted board-approved budgets and budgets as amended. The column right after those two funds, and I'm sorry, I'll back up. I'm showing you the actual amounts that we've spent as of today. Yes, because I was working on this morning. This is as of today. Actually, last night. So I pulled these numbers last night up to the day. So you have actual data. So when you see that $676,887.21 in local revenue for 420, that's what we actually got in local revenue. And there might be questions on that, or I'll elaborate on that after I go through the column. But so those first two columns are showing your actual expenses or revenue for 240 and 420. Then that next column is showing you the final budget that I'm proposing based on what our actual expenditures, our revenue were. So for that first column, I'm saying that we need to have an improvement of $700,000 because when you go to the next column over, you'll see those two funds added together give us a total of $676,887. Everybody still with me? Okay. So the difference is $23,113, which gives us a 3% variance. TEA is okay with that. If it was 11%, then I'd have to suggest a different amount for our final approved budget because we would want a number that's within that 10% range. So basically, what I do is I look at those year-to-date numbers and I look at where our budget is, and I put more in or take more out based on what we have to work with, first of all, because I can't put more in or take more out than what we have. And then based on us hitting that 3% range. The revenue is pretty much set. I can't change the revenue for our state program because that's based on our attendance. The expenses are really where we do a lot of our discussions and talk about what costs we need to cut when it comes time to fitting everything into the budget. And the expenses you'll find a little bit further down, organized by program services. If you'll see that, if you follow your left-hand column and you go down, you'll see where it says expenses and then program services. And so then it's broken up into different categories that TEA uses to track all of our expenses. So you'll see what we actually spent, and then you'll see what I'm saying we need to approve for our budget to make sure we stay under that 10%. Moving on down, after the expenses, you go into which is really just information on something that kind of carries over into our audit. This is where TEA looks at if we made money or lost money during the year, where we have our increase or decrease in net assets. So you'll notice in that first column, you'll see a negative $87,488 in that first column for child nutrition. That's basically saying that they had $87,000 more in expenses than they had in revenue. So that program actually lost money for the school year. If you move over to the next column, you'll see that in that column we have a $672,665 positive number. So our general fund actually saved that much money. I mean, we had that much more money come in than we had go out, which is about $200,000 more than what we usually have on average. How did we do this? We had a lot of grants. So that number will probably go down next year as we lose some of our grant money. And the way that the child nutrition program basically can survive with having that big of a gap as far as in what they brought in and what they lost, if you go down to the next row, net assets at the beginning of the year, That's basically saying when the child nutrition program started at the beginning of the year, since we've been around for a while, they had accumulated $167,000 that they had not spent. So even if it was $5,000 one year, $10,000 next year, the same thing that we're looking at right now where they had a loss, in previous years they had a gain, so that gain just carried over. And they've been carrying over since after our first year. This is the first year that they've had, I take that back, this is the second year they've had a loss. They had a loss last year. The thing about the child nutrition program is we aren't worried about their loss. They have to lose it. We can't keep that money there. They can only have 3 months operating expenses, and any more than that, we have to have a plan to get rid of it. And the food program actually did have, excuse me. Oh, stop.
Action required.
I wanted to finish that even though I put it on silent. But we actually had our review where the state comes in and review the child nutrition program. And when they saw that amount of money that we had there, we actually had to show them our written plan to reduce that amount of money that we were carrying because it was more than 3 months operating expenses. So basically, whatever the payroll cost for the food program, whatever the cost for buying food for the month, multiply that for 3 months amount that we need, and if we have more than that, then we have to have a plan to start reducing that. They don't allow us to carry that over. And they don't allow us to use the food revenue in any other program. So even though the food has all this money that it hasn't spent on the food program, we can't say, oh, well, let's use that to get some new tires for the buses. We can't. We have to use it on food service activities. So with that being said, the plan all along was to start using that money to start buying some equipment for when the new facilities get built. I don't know if that's what happened, but here at the end, I think there was about $35,000 alone of purchases that Melinda just made for different tables and refrigerators and things of that nature. So even though it looks bad that she lost money for this specific year, we did need to start eating away at that number and getting rid of that number because we can get in trouble for having money there, as crazy as that sounds. Did you have questions, or are you holding your hand? So I want to kind of walk you through that because that's pretty significant for this food service program. And then the next row, net assets at the end of the year, basically we just take what we started with, subtracted what happened for the current year, and that's where we end. So she started out with a positive number. She lost some money, so it took away from that number. So at the end of the year, she has less money to carry over next year. Kind of like your check account. You know, you start with a balance, you write some checks, at the end of the month, you know, that's your balance you're going to carry over. So that's pretty much the same thing that's happening in those rows. If you keep going down, I have the same expenses, but they're organized in a different way. Up top, they were organized by program services. So you saw what we're spending on instruction. You saw what we're spending on transportation. Down here at the bottom, you see what we're spending by what we call our objects. And we group those in categories like our payroll, our supplies. So yes, we have instruction, but a part of that instruction cost is payroll, is supplies, it might be contract services. So it's just two different ways of looking at the numbers. So if you want to see what we're spending on payroll, if you look at our ADA over there, we're spending $2.4 million in payroll costs in our ADA. So any questions on that data? Everybody flow with what they're looking at?
Can you say that again?
What, the last part?
Yeah.
About how it's organized. Okay, so the last part I was saying that it's just organized differently than the top, in that if you wanted to look at how much money we spent in a different category, if you want to see how much we spent on payroll or supplies, you can look down here and see for the year, what did we spend on those? You won't see it broken down, let's say, in instruction, how much did we spend on supplies, but you'll see overall what we spent in supplies.
Each one of these services.
Right.
And your net it ties out. The 377 ties out with the total expenses.
But I think the expenses, you could tell right away, the expenses are food service and plant maintenance for CMP.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see the
and
food.
then down below, you just see
what went to payroll.
right, because
Yeah.
food services is the is what we call the function. It's the cafeteria.
So the payroll
But
is included.
Payroll is a part of that. The meals that they serve, all the food they have to buy, the equipment they have to use, the trays they have to buy, the disposable trays, all of that is a part of food service. But down below, the cost for the staff goes in payroll. The cost for the supplies and the food go in trays.
Does that make sense?
That separate cost you see there, plant maintenance for food program, that's the rent. It pays rent to the nonprofit because the nonprofit owns the property. So that's not considered by TEA a food cost because they have definitions on what I can and can't classify in these categories. So rent, even though it's for the food program, isn't a food service cost. It's called a plant maintenance and operation cost. So it goes in at 51.
Debbie, I thought I said you had a question.
So going back to the top, and if you understand the different rows, just going back across, you got your 240 actual, your 420 actual, and then you have what I'm suggesting as the final budget amendment. Because when you compare that final budget to that actual year-to-date total, we have a balance that keeps us within the variance that TEA will allow. I did want to walk you through that local revenue because that's something that we don't always have and we won't always have in 420. That's $676,000 at the top. That is actually revenue that the school is getting as a reimbursement for the EP staff. The EP staff in the past were paid as payroll from the EP grant, which is totally separate from this. And a change was made to bring them in as a part of the school staff. And we basically contracted them out to the EP program. So we kind of contracted out our own employees to ourselves.
For retirement purposes.
Yeah, the benefit of that is it allowed EP employees to benefit from our teacher retirement fund. Because with them sitting on the other side of our nonprofit, not involved with our school, they weren't allowed to participate in the Texas teacher retirement system. So in order to bring them into that system, we brought them in as employees. And the EP grant basically reimburses the school for their payroll costs. And that's why you see that large revenue coming in there. And it's kind of a wash. The revenue comes in, but there's an expense down below that it washes out with. So there's really no gain there. It's just a wash. Whatever we spend, we get back from the program, dollar for dollar. But it just looks a little different sticking out up there. We don't have $700,000 of local revenue coming in from some anonymous sources somewhere.
And you'll see this one more year because we have one more year of the 5-year grant.
And then it will go away.
Then it will go away.
So I know you're just getting this for the first time, so if you can, just look over and see if you have any initial questions. This is the same format I've used the last couple of times when I presented information to you guys. So I've tried to stay consistent with that so the numbers don't look totally different.
I'm just going to make a suggestion, LaRonda. You correct me if I'm wrong, but that 21 funds, they're going to have to go to 13 or 23 for indicator, 14 on admin.
21 is fine. 23 is what I got rid of.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm sorry. I did it backwards.
It's got to go to...
I did it backwards.
Okay.
Yeah, it's 20. I moved it to... I moved it to 21.
Out of 23?
23, yes. What Ms. Sharba is talking about is when we picked up our TIPS grant to help us meet our achievement gap, we ended up with a huge hit in what TEA called our administrative costs because this function 21, they consider that administration. So all of the people that we had in place there, like Mr. Martinez, they started adding to our admin costs. And we're only allowed a certain percentage of admin costs before we run into trouble with our Charter First rating, which caused us some credibility troubles. So our solution for that was to make sure that those people were considered in 23 instead of 21. So it's basically a matter of reclassifying them. So what Mashaba just called to my attention is that in ERA, I moved them from 23 to 21. So everything you see there in 21 should be in 23.
And you see 210, 340, or 210, okay.
Yeah, and that should be in 23.
Now, I know we did 23 last year, Loranda, but I think you mentioned if we did 13, we get more benefit on the numerator. So either way it goes, 23 or 13, we get out of danger. So I'm just going to ask Loranda to recheck that.
Recheck what?
To see where we get the most bang for our